A cold wind pierced through as a group of tourists climbed the snowy slope. The sky was covered with gray clouds, and the sun barely penetrated through them, coloring the mountain peaks in pale pink shades. The main character, Alex, walked in front, keeping a close eye on the road. An experienced traveler, he knew that one should not relax in such places. Every step could be the last if you weren't careful. "What's next?" asked one of the band members, Peter, a young guy who was in the mountains for the first time. "It's fine so far, but the weather is changing. We need to hurry," Alex replied, glancing at the sky. The wind began to pick up, kicking up snow dust and howling among the rocks. It was a worrying sign. "I don't like this," muttered Sarah, a girl with short dark hair. "We're not far from the camp, are we?" Alex nodded. They were supposed to reach the intermediate parking lot in a couple of hours, but mountains are an unpredictable place. The beginning of the disaster. A few minutes later, there was a dull crack. The earth seemed to shake. In the distance, somewhere higher up the slope, snowballs began to fall. "What is this?" Peter cried out. Alex looked up sharply. "Avalanche." "Run!" "Stop it!" he barked, but the snow had already begun to descend from the top, turning into a deadly white wave. The avalanche was moving fast, and the rumble grew louder, turning into a deafening roar. A second later, snow filled the entire slope. The group scattered, trying to get out of the way of the snow mass. Alex ran towards the nearest rocks, knowing that the only chance to survive was to find shelter or cling to something solid. The snow was catching up with him. He felt his legs sinking, as if he was being pulled back into the deadly stream. With a final effort, he rushed forward, towards the protruding rock, grabbed the edge, and at the same moment an avalanche covered him with his head. Moments in the white hell silence. The snow was pressing down from all sides. Alex felt his body constrict, as ice crystals made their way under his clothes. He was buried alive. Panic tried to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. If he starts to panic, the oxygen will run out faster. Where's the top? Where's the bottom? He wiggled his fingers, then his hand. The snow was loose. So if it's not deep, there's a chance to get out. His fingers found something hard, the edge of his backpack, so he hadn't been turned over. He stretched his hand up and felt air. Weak, but the air. Gathering all his strength, he began to dig, making his way to the surface. A few minutes later, a cold wind hit my face. He got out, but there wasn't a single person around. The group disappeared. Alex was left alone in the heart of the icy mountains. Alex was breathing heavily, lying in the snow. The frosty air burned his lungs, and his heart was pounding in his chest. He survived. But as soon as he looked around, his chest turned cold. He was alone. Somewhere far away, in the place of their path, there was now a huge mass of snow. No one responded to his screams. The snow had swallowed up the tracks, and it was impossible to determine where the avalanche might have taken his friends. "Damn!" he gasped, looking at the endless snow, capped peaks. Equipment search and orientation. The first thing he did was check his gear. He has his backpack with him, but one strap is torn, and the water bottle is lost somewhere. There was only a small snack left in his pockets, a granola bar and a handful of nuts. It was clearly not enough. It was necessary to determine the direction of movement urgently. Alex scanned the horizon. The peaks all looked the same, but he knew one rule: always move downhill. There's a better chance of finding water, shelter, or access to people. But first you need to get warm. The danger of cold. The cold crept under his clothes, and his fingers began to go numb. He knew that if he didn't keep warm, hypothermia would kill faster than hunger. Alex started to move. Any movement is better than sitting still. He walked down, trying not to step on the loose snow so as not to fall through. The wind was getting stronger, and his face was burning from the cold, but an hour later, he saw a small wooded area lower down the slope. "Here it is, a chance to survive," he muttered and quickened his pace. Search for shelter. By evening, the wind had turned into an icy squall, giving no chance to just stand still. In the depths of the forest, he found an uprooted tree root, something like a depression between rocks and snow. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. He began to strengthen the shelter. He used branches to create a barrier from the wind, dug a small hole in the snow, and lay down there, wrapped in what was left of his jacket. It's going to be a hell of a night. Fire is the only chance to survive. The biggest problem is to build a fire. Alex remembered that he had a lighter in his jacket pocket, but his hands were shaking and the branches were damp. He was looking for dry wood chips, fanning a weak fire, fighting the biting wind. With each attempt, the embers went out. But finally, a thin wisp of smoke rose into the air, and then a small flame ignited. He survived for another day. But that was only the beginning of the struggle.
It's been a long night. Alex was shivering from the cold, despite the weak campfire he had managed to build. The wind beat in his face, the snow seeped under his clothes, and every movement caused pain in his muscles. He tried to sleep, but every minute he had to wake up and add new branches to the fire so as not to freeze to death. The morning light did not bring relief, the sky was covered with gray clouds, hinting at an approaching storm. I need to move out as soon as possible, otherwise I'll just freeze here. Alex packed his backpack, pulled on his hood, and headed down the hill. Water search. He had not drunk water for almost a day. Thirst was stronger than hunger, my throat was dry, my lips were cracked. It's not easy to find water in the mountains, but he knew that pure snow wasn't the best option. If you eat it just like that, the body will spend more energy on warming up. Solution: melt the snow. Fortunately, he still had a lighter. He collected the snow in a metal lid from a lost flask and heated it over the coals. When the snow had melted, he carefully took a few sips. Better than nothing, he muttered. But there was little water. It was necessary to find the real source. The first signs of life. After several hours of walking, he noticed footprints in the snow. These were not human footprints, but rather some kind of animal. Maybe a hare or a fox. Alex knew that if there were animals, then there might be a stream or a water source nearby. He quickened his pace and soon heard a faint gurgling sound. He froze, listening. A few meters down the slope, a thin stream flowed between the rocks. My heart leapt with joy. Alex quickly filled the flask, took a careful sip, and felt the energy returning to his body. Hunting, the first success. But now there is another question: food. I was out of nuts and a candy bar, and although the water helped to satisfy my hunger a little, my stomach was cramping with emptiness. He remembered how, as a child, his father taught him how to make traps for game. Using several sturdy branches and a rope from his backpack, he set a simple trap next to the bushes, where, judging by the tracks, the animal was walking. All that remained was to wait. Meanwhile, he checked his body. His fingers were slightly frostbitten, his legs hurt, but there were no critical injuries. A couple of hours later, he heard a sharp click. The trap had worked. He ran up and saw a small hare, which was frantically twitching in a noose. Sorry, buddy. But I need to survive. It was unpleasant for him to kill an animal, but it was a choice, either him or hunger. With the help of a sharpened stone he found, he quickly butchered the carcass and, returning to his camp, lit a fire and cooked the first real food in 2 days. The smell of roasting meat seemed to be the best fragrance in the world. Every bite was like a breath of life. But the threat is still there. That night, Alex woke up to a strange sound. A long drawn-out howl could be heard somewhere in the distance. Wolves. They smelled the meat. Alex tightened his grip on his makeshift spear, a long branch burned in the fire. The fight was just beginning. The nocturnal predator. Alex lay low. The bonfire was still smoldering, but the flames were no longer so bright, and in its light, moving shadows flickered behind the trees. The howl was getting closer. He froze, listening to every sound. They tracked me down. Wolves rarely hunt humans, but if they are hungry, especially in winter, they can attack. And here, in the mountains, they are the masters. Alex slowly got up, clutching his makeshift spear, a thick stick with a burnt tip. That was all he had against the pack. the branches rustled. Two glowing eyes appeared out of the darkness. The first wolf. There's another one after him. They stood there, carefully assessing the man, sniffing. Their muscles were tense, their tails were down, and they were waiting. Alex knew that if he ran, they would attack at once. He took a step back, trying not to make any sudden movements. With his left hand, he threw a burning stick towards the wolves. She fell into the snow, scattering sparks. One of the wolves jerked its head up, hissed, and jumped back. The second one growled, but didn't move forward. Don't look them in the eye, but don't turn your back either. He backed up to the campfire, picked up another stick and swung it, trying to look bigger. Get out. Stop it, he barked, rising to a shout. The animals froze. A few seconds passed. Then the older wolf made a short, muffled sound, a signal to the others. After a moment, the shadows disappeared into the darkness. They're gone. But Alex knew they could come back. He quickly fanned the fire, threw more branches, and did not sleep a wink until dawn, fatigue and despair. By morning, he felt exhausted. Every muscle ached, and my head ached from fatigue and dehydration. He was drinking the water he got yesterday, but it wasn't enough. Although he managed to find food and scare away the wolves, he is not saved yet. It was necessary to move on. But where to? If I don't find people in the next couple of days, I just won't be able to stand it. He got up, scanned the horizon, and saw something important. In the distance, between the rocks, a thin thread of smoke rose into the sky. Someone is there. It could have been another tourist, hunters, or even rescuers. The last push. Alex clenched his fists. If this is a chance for salvation, I can't miss it. After packing his things, he walked towards the smoke. Along the way, we had to cross icy rivers, climb slippery rocks and fight the biting wind. But he was guided by hope. After several hours of walking, he finally came to a valley. There, at the foot of the cliff, stood a small hut. Smoke was rising from the chimney. He took the last steps, barely able to stand on his feet, and knocked on the door. The door opened, and a tall man in warm clothes stood on the threshold. My God, are you alive? Alex's eyes filled with tears. The door creaked, revealing the warm light of the hut. The man standing on the threshold looked stern, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. God, are you okay? His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken to people in a long time. Alex struggled to stay on his feet. My whole body ached, my lips were dry, my thoughts were confused. I got lost, for a few days, in the mountains. The voice trembled with fatigue. The man grabbed him by the arm and led him into the house. Sit down, boy. I'll help you now. Alex collapsed onto a rough-hewn bench near the stove. The heat from the fire immediately enveloped him, making its way under his clothes, warming his frozen bones. He couldn't even believe that he had survived. I'm saved. First aid and rest. The man turned out to be a hunter. His name was Victor, and he had lived here for many years, sometimes going down to the village, which was several dozen kilometers away. He poured hot tea and held out a bowl of thick meat soup. Eat it. You look like you're going to collapse at any minute. Alex didn't argue. The food was hot and satisfying, and he ate without even tasting it, simply because his body needed fuel. Victor checked his hands and feet, several frostbitten fingers, deep scratches, but nothing fatal. You're in luck, kid. If I had spent another day in the forest, I might not have lived. Alex nodded. He knew that. He sat by the stove for several hours, and then, for the first time in many days, he really fell asleep soundly, without disturbing dreams, without cold, without fear. Coming back to life. The next day, Victor reported that there was an old radio station in the valley, and it could be used to send a signal to rescuers. You can stay here until you're stronger, and then we'll go downstairs together. Alex agreed. In the following days, he helped Victor by carrying firewood, cleaning tools, learning how to hunt and set traps. They talked by the stove in the evenings, and Alex began to realize that this disaster had changed him forever. He was no longer the kind of person who just went camping for an adventure. Now he knew that life wasn't just about convenience and technology. It's a struggle. This is the ability to persevere. A week later, rescuers finally found him. They were surprised to see that the guy was alive and well, and next to him was a strange hermit hunter who had saved him from certain death. Before leaving, Alex glanced at Victor. "Thank you. If it wasn't for you." The man nodded, not liking unnecessary words. "You saved yourself, kid. You fought. Now go. But don't forget that the mountains don't forgive anyone for being careless." Alex smiled. He will never forget this lesson. He saved